And we're talking about money here, real money, not a bit of bond money that we vote every year in Rhode Island or we vote in Massachusetts. This is much bigger money. I also want to highlight the symmetry, and Dr. Keenan wasn't here this morning, but Sheldon Whitehouse stood up and basically said there's two big disruptors ahead. One is the bubble in the coastal real estate market, obviously built on your research, thank you. And two, the bubble in the carbon market, just basically what will happen to the fossil economy at some point when it's leveraged out and these kinds of factors come in. So we've kind of pulled things together at the end here. But what I'm really excited about also is the perspectives of Bill, who again has been trying from the very beginning in his career to bring these ideas and sustainability and thoughts forward on how to build a strong, healthy community in what is probably the most challenged community in New England. If you don't know this, Bridgeport is a frontline community of itself, and Bill's work there and his energy and his power and what he tried to do there was most impressive to all of us at EPA. So I'm going to turn it over to Bill and give your perspective on a lot of what you've heard today, because you've heard most of what has been covered.
Thank you very much. And first off, I'm going to check the Harvard plagiarism rules, because Jesse just stole my whole presentation. This felt like I was at a staff meeting back at City Hall. We talked every day. It was refreshing to hear actual data, actual numbers, actual science. And luckily I get to work now at a science museum. I started giving you the advertisement. It's exit 47 off the Merritt Parkway. You're all welcome. If you come, I'll give you a tour. Berman's already set up a plan. It occurs to me, you know, working at a science museum, one of the things that I observed and learned about was that Earth and Venus are basically twin planets. They're both in the Goldilocks zone. They're both about the same size. And they have very many similarities. One is the amount of carbon that they have. The difference is that Venus's carbon is in its atmosphere primarily, and ours is primarily in our crust. But as we know through the sectors of energy and transportation and buildings, we're taking it out of the crust and putting it into the environment at faster than our carbon cycle can recycle it back into the earth. So that's my little science lesson. That's about as far as my science goes, because as I said, I'm a recovering politician and I'm not a scientist. But I want to just say a couple things about language maybe. And one is that when I hear resilience director, it sounds to me a little bit like funeral director, because it's just, you're going to bury more bodies, right, depending on how little we mitigate. So I always felt the most important thing in fighting climate change was mitigation. I still feel that way. I was happy to see your chart where they're both on par, because the less we mitigate, the more we're going to have to build and pay our way out with resiliency. And I know that a lot of you, like the word resiliency, but to me, we ought to think about that word, because it's sort of giving up the ship a little bit. We can do a lot less resiliency if we, ask America and other countries to do more mitigation. And cities have a really particular tough time. I don't need to tell you, but let's just talk about it for a second, because size matters when you're talking about a city. You're talking about Providence, New Haven, Bridgeport, Hartford, some of the smallest cities in the world. Bridgeport's one of the smallest cities in the world, 16 square miles. We have about 150,000 people. We have poor social outcomes, we have poor schools, we have high taxes, we have undervalued property, and we have a difficulty paying our pensions and our bond payments. Yet we are the solution to climate change to a large extent. Cities are a huge part of the solution, if not the most important part of the solution, because density of development has a huge impact. If you look at the three sectors of transportation, energy, and buildings, a lot of it boils down to moving water. We're mostly water. We move ourselves, we move our food, we move our sewage, and we move our clean water. And we move it with fossil fuels. And the further the distance, the more, I keep things simple, I was the mayor, the further the distance, the more carbon we're releasing into the atmosphere. When I went to China at a climate task force with the mayors of China, there were 4 American mayors and there were 4 Chinese mayors. The cities on the Chinese panel were 20 million, 16 million, 10 million, and 5 million. And the panel of American mayors were 250,000, 150,000, 100,000, and 80,000. They gave us a lot of respect, but we felt like sub-neighborhoods of neighborhoods of their city. If Connecticut were one city, instead of 169 cities, we'd be a city so small that all the major mayors would have never heard of us. The guy who was 5 million, the people were looking at him like, who invited him? What's he doing here? Who is this guy? 5 million. Chump city, right? And I'm from a state that's only 3.5 million people. So the city was almost double the size of the state I came from, and it was one city. Shanghai is 2,400 square miles. You know, even Rome and London are 500 and 300, 500 and 600. New York City's 300 square miles, and Bridgeport's 16. Providence is 24, New Haven is 19, Hartford's 18. These cities cannot survive. I once looked at all the cities and towns in Connecticut. You can do this in your state, it won't change. Anywhere in New England, it's not going to change. Look at the percent of their budget that comes from federal and state sources. Of the 169 towns, there was 40, at the time I looked at this, it was a couple years ago, 40 that got more than 20% of their budget. Now, if you don't have 20% of your budget, you're out of business as a city. Your discretionary income in a city, if you're a poor city, is 1%, 2%. If you are, thank you for nodding, that made me feel good. I didn't go to Harvard. Yeah. But when a Harvard professor nods, you know you got something. So the discretionary income of the city is tiny. If you're Greenwich, maybe you've got 5 or 6% discretionary income. Well, think about it. Why would you raise property taxes if you're not going to spend it? But we are tax and spend. Cities are only tax and spend because we wouldn't tax you if we had no good reason to spend it. So size matters. And in the problem that cities have is we are the solution. If we invested in infrastructure, we could bring more people. Let me just give you this one statistic. Bridgeport's carbon footprint per capita is about 7 to 8 tons annually. The average American suburbanite creates about 20 tons. Unfortunately, most of you live in suburbs. I can tell because it's an all-white audience. So most of you live in suburbs. Race is a big part of the problem. Most people don't want to send their kids to schools in these tiny little cities where all of the black and brown people are focused because you'll get an inferior education. We look back when I was mayor on how many mayors sent their kids to public schools. I'm not bragging. You know, I'm divorced partly because of this reason. I continue to send my kids to public schools even though they weren't getting a good education. There was no mayor in modern history. We went back 100 years, whoever sent their kids to public schools in Bridgeport. Isn't that a terribly condemning and damning statement? Mayors don't support their own schools. I ran a referendum to take the schools over and have me be responsible for the schools, and it lost because the teachers union is a terrible organization. I'm sorry for all of you members who are out there. And they didn't want any accountability. So anyway, so schools are a big problem. Race is a big problem. Cities don't have the ability to pay for all the great things they could do to help solve this problem. So what do? In America, where you pay more to live in a city, you get less, and you still have the key to success for the climate problem, I think what we've got to really do is get every city to write a sustainability plan. Kurt mentioned Be Green 2020. I hate plans. I had to be dragged kicking and screaming to do a plan. Sorry, planning table. But I want to go bang the nails and dig the holes and plant the trees and get the Pequannock Station rebuilt and stop the flooding. But the plan got 150 people in the city involved and excited and engaged. We had corporate contributions of time and money come out of the woodwork because of this. And during the Great Recession, for the 8 years I was mayor, there was $1 billion at least invested in Bridgeport. I didn't even believe it. When I lost, it was a terrible loss. I lost to a guy who just got out of jail. It was terrible. But as Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government except for everything else we've tried. So I'm happy now at the Discovery Museum. I'd love to have you all visit there. But before I end up, I want to just say a couple things about why mayors are so important. It's how we talk about the problem, right? It's not climate change. It's not resilience, it's not sustainability, but we're going to use all those words in these kind of rooms. But when mayors go out to talk to their constituents, they talk about jobs. I'm going to get you a job. People who need a job don't care if it's putting in solar photovoltaic or a fuel cell. They want to get a job. They want Uncle Charlie who can't get a job to get a job. They want their mother to have a lower light bill. They don't want the water in the basement. These are things that people can relate to. They want their kids to have nice fields. You know, environmentalists tried to stop me building AstroTurf fields. or field turf fields because of some off-gassing. That's BS. First off, there's no science to back it up. Second off, I have a lot of fat kids who need to run around and lose weight, right? I can get 13 fields built with Cal Ripken. I can divert stormwater. I can relieve my sewage plant of the overruns, and I can improve property values. There's off-gassing. There might be some kids. They have flagellates. It's just the same as the off-gassing, and you know, we're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. And so we built 13 of these things, and we built splash pads, and we built parks, and we have 20,000 homes off the grid, and $1 billion of investment. And it was the greatest experience of my life to be able to do that. And the reason why we wanted to do that was we wanted every city to do that. If you do a sustainability plan, if you elect mayors who talk about getting Uncle Clem a job and lowering Aunt Tilly's electric bill, and not the polar bears, and not, but not the planning, but the parks that result from the plantings, and the trails that result from the plantings. If we talk about, and again, this is part of the reason why we have political problems outside of this room, is that some parties, I won't say which one, I think you can tell which one I belong to, have forgotten how to talk to people about what matters. I gotta get a job, I gotta pay my mortgage, I gotta pay the bill, I gotta get the damn water out of my basement, right? And so all those things are the ways that we could talk to our constituents, because you all have constituents. We don't have to talk in our highfalutin language, it's kind of cold and antiseptic. We can talk about things that mean something to people, we'll get their hearts and minds, and I think the rest of them will follow.
Great. Thank you, Bill.